All right.
Wait, what?
Nothing. I
Oh,
didn't know if I was hitting or you were.
hey, good morning.
Yeah, exactly. Good morning.
Good morning.
Um, looks like it's cold there in Virginia
It's
Beach.
getting chilly. And I like to sit outside in the mornings with my coffee. It's kind of my morning routine. So I like get all bundled up um, and just sit outside with my coffee in the crisp 40-degree air.
Oh man, it's crisp here. It's 50s something, high 50s, but
Yeah,
that's freezing for
it's
people
good.
in Florida. So it's
Yeah,
good.
starting to feel a little Christmassy, a
That's
little
it.
wintry.
Um, so Christmassy at the gym. What is anything change coaching wise, class wise? Things get busy, less busy?
Not really. For you? I mean, you've got not really. Still regular group of people. We don't have heat. Um, so people complain a little more. But then once you get them warmed up, the layers start coming off and everybody's fine. And I always remind everybody in the summer when everyone's complaining about the humidity and how hot it is, I remind them what it feels like in the winter when everybody's complaining about, it's either too hot or too cold. So everybody just likes to be
Yeah,
upset before they get like warmed up, right? That's part of the general warm up is just listening to people be like, I'm sore and I'm cold or I'm hot. And then
you're making me do 2 rounds of this. And why are there burpees in the warm up? And it's like, hey, you're here to get fit, right?
Yeah, but it's good. People still call. But I think that's kind of just part of it. We laugh about it, get through the warm up, and then everybody's ready to rock.
Get going. Yeah. It's an interesting time here. It's obviously holidays, people start traveling more. So there's kind of people are a little bit more spotty as far as our normal members, plus being in St. Augustine. We get a lot of drop-ins this time of year. I think
really? Like just Florida kind of like snowbird situation, or people coming to visit family, or just that's where they want to travel for the holidays?
Everything. Well, St. Augustine does a big Christmas thing. So we've got the downtown lights is like this big attraction. So people come here for that. And it's just a cool place to come. So like the day after Thanksgiving, I think we had a class with like 12 drop-ins.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. I think we had more drop-ins than we had regular members.
What did you have programmed? Squat snatches and
muscle ups.
Muscle ups. Yeah.
The day after.
The day of the year you're going to get the most drop-ins. Let's program the most complex workout that we possibly can.
Yeah, we want it to be fun, right? It's not fun if there's not muscle ups or there's not squat snatches.
Or filthy 50, maybe. That's always a good one when we've got a lot of people coming to the gym.
That one, actually, I don't think.
I like that one.
That one could work in that scenario because you could just start it almost like Fight Gone Bad style, where you start at different stations.
Yeah.
And the movements are simple enough to where we could get through it. It'd just be a lot of like hand holding to get going.
Yeah. It reminds me of like doing the 12 days of Christmas for like your Christmas Eve or day after Christmas workout or whatever. There's just so much happening, but if you make the movement simple enough, you can manage it. It's fine.
Yeah, you can figure it out. That one, yeah, that's a pet peeve of mine, but people like it, so might as well keep doing it. But yeah, it was a cap workout. It had running, it had kettlebell sumo deadlift high pulls, and then farmers carries with a partner. So it worked out good. It was fun.
That's great. Partner workouts are always. I like partner workouts. I feel like it's a polarizing topic, the partner workout. Do you agree? Like people either hate them or love them. People feel strongly about a partner workout.
Yeah, they do. I'd be curious for those of you guys that are watching. Are you guys pro partner workout? You anti partner workout? There's stipulations. Here's from my experience, the people that don't enjoy partner workouts feel like they're a burden. They're either like kind of new and they come to a class time, they don't really know anybody, so they don't have that go-to partner, or there's somebody that's like, oh man, if the scores are really important in the gym, then somebody's like, well, I'm going to slow somebody down. Mm-hmm. I don't want to do that. Or you've got the opposite where you've got somebody that's super competitive and they want to win. And they're like, oh, well, if my buddy and my partner that's going to help me win isn't here, well, then I don't want to do it. But I've started mixing in a lot more. Like a lot of times I think it's like a weekend thing. We do a lot midweek,
and it's partner workouts midweek.
Yeah. Recently, I feel like I've almost had a partner workout a week, at least one. Amit's pro partner workout. I love it. Kelly, partner workout
Saturday
every morning at 9 a.m.
I love it.
when it's consistent like that, then your members get to the point where it's like, hey, this is what we do on Saturdays. This is great. And I know that's the case at a lot of gyms, because a lot of times when people are dropping in, I'll get the email or the text of like, hey, we're dropping in. I get a couple of things. Will you tell me what the workout is? Because I need to know what gear I need to bring.
What gear? Yes. As soon as you said that, I was like, they've got to know which gear to bring.
Yeah, what gear is involved? And then is it a partner workout? And do you have to do it with a partner? And I'm like, the way that we do it at our gym is our coaches rotate who coaches Saturday class. And currently we're doing a hero workout every other Saturday. But if it's not a hero workout that's planned, then the coach themselves gets to program for the weekend.
Oh, cool.
For their Saturday class. And so a lot of times, you know, someone will be asking me, because I'm responding to the people inquiring, and they're like, what's the workout? And I'll look and see if the coach has already proactively put it up. And if they haven't, I'm like, I don't know. We'll see. Partner workout. I don't know. Let's see.
This is one of the reasons I love it. You see this, Amit? You get to push the pace as you know rest is coming, right?
I know. I think it makes people go faster for sure.
Yeah. And I always tell people that for the people that are like, oh, I'm going to slow people down. Like, actually, your partner's probably going to get a better workout because they're going to get that rest time. And so then when it's time for them to go, they can just go a little bit harder.
Yeah. They don't want to let you down. So they go faster. Let's see. We got extra sloppy. I like them. The last gym I went to, I would poor attendance for them. Current gym has massive attendance. That's it, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, it's so interesting on whether you're the gym and you've created the culture where everybody likes doing it, or some of them not quite the same. What do we got from Matt?
I definitely agree with that.
Partner workout. I think some people get upset by them because the score, but I think they have great value even beyond community building. Yeah, I agree. And to your point of like getting the extra rest, we've done stuff like the Chief.
Mm-hmm. Love the Chief. That's one of my favorite workouts.
That was not first. It was my second ever affiliate workout. The first affiliate that I joined.
Omar, we're talking about partner workouts, Omar. Are you pro partner workout or against partner workout?
Yeah.
You better be pro.
Yeah, we know Omar is. He's all.
Sorry, Todd. Go ahead.
I love it.
Omar only has 10 minutes, so I had to make sure that we pulled him into this. Time sensitive.
Caught up. Yeah, but you'll go harder. Like there's a lot of those that because I get rest, now I will sell my soul in the one round of it that you do. Like
for sure.
Three clean, 6 push-ups, 9 squats. It's a 3-minute interval. You rest a minute. You do the 3-minute interval again. You've got 5 rounds of that. And like when I'm doing that with a partner, I get more rounds personally, or close to the same amount as I do when I do it by myself, just because of the pace at which you can do that thing. So pretty darn cool. Now, well, I'm trying to figure out how to loop this to the topic, but the topic that we wanted to talk about.
Sometimes there's no transition.
Yeah, I know. I was like, partners.
Speaking of partner workouts, let's talk about coaching.
Yeah, let's revisit what we were talking about last time, which was that concept of like static, dynamic, static. And so we've talked about this a lot. There was a lot of questions last time. And it's just, I think we mentioned the value of this thing, being able to engage the group, make more corrections, that kind of stuff. And so with that, I think getting a concept and an idea of what this actually looks like. So I've got a video of me demonstrating this concept that I wanted to show, and I want to see what you think as you're watching this thing. Where are you looking? What would you be doing? And so I'm going to add this to the stage. We're going to watch this video a little bit, and then I'm going to pause at strategic times and ask you some questions. So let's see what we got.
Okay. So before you play it, let's lay the stage a little bit. Okay. So you're going to be coaching a movement, and you're working on implementing that process we dug into last time, right? Like scanning for static, looking at dynamic, scanning for static, and just trying to maintain that rhythm throughout the whole time of you teaching this movement.
Yeah. And so let's talk about that a little bit more too, of like, so static, what are we talking about when we say static, dynamic, static? What's the first static position that there is when we're coaching a movement?
Well, it's just the setup.
Yeah. So setup position, right? Oh. And then what's the second static position?
It would be likely a receiving position. And then we can potentially create a static position, right? Like, for example, holding our athletes at the bottom of a squat. We look at their setup, we say squat, and then we hold them at the bottom of the squat to create that like receiving position, if you will, at the bottom of the squat.
Yeah, receiving, finish, any of that kind of stuff. So it's the start and the end are the statics, and then the dynamic is what's happening in the middle, and that's the thing that's fast. And so we've sometimes labeled it like a 2-1-2 drill or the 2-1-2 concept, because in an ideal setting, you can look at multiple people in a static position, so 2 or more in the SAG setup, give some cues and corrections, and then 1 in the middle, the dynamic phase, because there people are moving and they're moving fast. So I can only look at one person and typically one thing. And then once they're standing still again in that receiving or that finish position, then I can look at multiple people. And so 2 or more is the option there.
Yeah. And I like that you pointed that out, because a lot of people have heard it referred to as the 2-1-2. And this is essentially the same thing. It's what we're talking about, right?
And the numbers on the outside, like the bread on the sandwich, right? The 2 and the 2 are not really important. It can be 1 on either side. When you get really good, it can be 5 potentially. But one big takeaway is that the middle is always 1.
Yeah, the middle is always
1.
That's one of my favorite questions to ask people, like trainers, when I'm working with them, either at the level 2 courses or doing coach development. It's like, okay, then how many people were you just watching? And sometimes I'll get the 1, but a lot of times it's like, okay, I was trying to watch this half of the room. Like, wrong. 1 person. And very rarely am I so absolute where I'm like, no, that is wrong. But that is one situation where I'm like, you have to only watch 1 person or you are not going to see anything. It is just way too hard.
Yeah. Yeah. You like way down the road in your coaching journey, if you're working with the same athletes and you know their tendencies, you might be able to glance at one and double check that you're seeing what you normally see from that athlete, and also glance at another one. But that's so far down the road that's not relevant.
Don't even worry about it. Yeah, we don't even want to worry about it. It's one of those things where it's like, if you're focusing on one thing and you're really looking for that one thing and you happen to see something else, right? Then fine, you've seen it, great. But you're not actively trying to see 2 things at one time.
Yes, that's exactly it. And so it's the peanut butter and jelly sandwich always has peanut butter and jelly in the middle. The outside, we might have white bread, might be wheat bread. We might do a pita. That can change a little bit, but for it to be a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, for it to be a 2-1-2 or a static, dynamic, static, it is always 1 in the middle of this thing. So, all right, with that,
crushing it with the food analogies today.
Dude, it might be. I'm on it today, I guess. Let's go.
All right, gluten-free bread, of course.
Yeah. Gluten-free only. Or I'll tell you about my carnivore-based, animal-based bread.
Then I will talk to you about my homemade sourdough bread.
Oh, I like
let's save that. Let's save that for another day. Yeah.
All right, here we go.
All right, let's watch it. Okay.
Doing reps of the push jerk. So I'll get you guys in your setup position. I'll tell you to go. You'll perform a rep. I'll tell you when to stand and to reset. So let's get in that setup position. AJ, do me a favor and bring your feet in a little bit closer. All right. So first things first, I said the push jerk, right? And so notice right off the bat. Well, go ahead. What did you notice, Cabo? I'm going to do that.
Oh, immediately, before you even did anything, you asked AJ to bring his feet in because he was really wide with his feet.
And this is one too, where it's like, how many times do we see coaches that are like, all right, guys, whatever movement we're doing, we'll mention, hey, I want your feet underneath your hips and I want your hands outside of the shoulders and bar in the rack position. And you say it. And when we say it, we assume that people will do it. And from my experience, 80% of the time, maybe they don't do it. 20% of the time they get it right, potentially. So anyways, always.
Well, this too. Yeah. And this too, like you're saying, always double check. This is also just about building the habit of always looking. Always look. If you're going to tell someone to do something, you should be prepared to look for the thing you just told them to do. Always. Like, I'm not ever going to tell my athlete to do something or get into a position blindly. Like if I'm going to tell them to get into a position or do something with their feet or do something with their hands, immediately that means that I'm going to then look to make sure that they've done it. And so a lot of this, even if you're working with athletes you've worked with all the time and you know their movement, still look, because it just continues to build the habit.
Yeah. All right, here we go. Let's keep going.
Go ahead and bring that bar up to your shoulders for me, Mindy. Renna, elbows forward a little bit. Good. Alyssa, look at me. Pull the bar down to your shoulders. All right, team, and go.
Nice. So about 3-ish before you even had them, or I guess 4 if we're including AJ's feet, before you even had them do a rep. You're already making corrections.
Yeah, and it's just a glance. And you notice a couple of that stuff. If it's like, well, if I go back just a hair, you guys heard me say something to Renna. Let's see. I think it was when she was there. Like, are those
with her elbows?
Are they terrible? No. Are they
No.
obviously out of place? Not like grossly, right?
Just right. They're not pointing behind her or anything. They're just slightly down.
Yep. And so even that little subtle adjustment, and I think a lot of times when athletes or coaches are looking for this and trying to accomplish this, they're looking so hard for something that's so big and major. And they're like, well, I don't see anything. And it's like, it doesn't, if we're coaching well, it's probably not going to be a major thing. Right. And even
right. But if there's room for anyone to get even a fraction better, then we owe it to our athlete to coach them into a slightly better position. And again, that's why this strategy is so powerful, is because this is exactly how we can do that, by having that template and that strategy where we're scanning people and looking for any even tiny minute thing that we could potentially adjust. I think the elbows on Renna are such a great example because they're fine, but
they could be better.
Right, exactly.
They're not terrible, but they could be better. And sometimes we as coaches are satisfied with fine, and we shouldn't be.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to be a fine coach, then go ahead and be satisfied with fine movement. But if you want to be a good coach, a world-class coach, then we've got to push ourselves to push our athletes a little bit more.
And then same thing as I move forward in this with Alyssa and getting the bar to her shoulders, how often are we working with a PVC pipe and we're like, well, it's a PVC pipe, there's mobility issues. And it's like, well, how do we know there's mobility issues if we've not actually tried to fix it?
For sure. And I always tell the coaches, make your athlete prove to you that they're in the best position they can get. And don't give them the free pass before you've even tried to make the adjustment. Because, I would go like 95% of the time, they can get into a little bit of a better position. It's very rare that they're already in the best they can possibly get in. But so often we just give our athletes a pass because we're like, well, they probably have tight shoulders. It's like, well, make them work a little harder and then they will prove to you what their end range of motion is.
Yes. Yeah. I always say that. I think it's because all of us coaches are also athletes. And I'm like, well, I wouldn't want to work that hard with the PVC pipe, so I'm not going to make somebody else, right? It's like, I know how hard it is to do that, but we're doing them a disservice if we don't.
Yeah, that prove you can't.
I like that. Yeah, Cody, I love that. Prove you can't. All right, so we keep going. I'm going to play here again. Notice, here's the next thing I want to take note of. I've glanced at everybody, said something, and then when I say go, watch where my head and my eyes go.
Okay.
Pull the bar down to your shoulders. All right, team, and go.
Clearly looking at what, Kristin?
Well, I'm going to guess because there's a little delay on the video, so I couldn't actually see. Will you replay that for me? I'm going to guess you were watching one person.
Okay. Let's see what we got.
Let's see. Okay.
And go.
Oh, it looks like you're looking at AJ's hips. That's what that looked like to me.
Yeah, looking at one person, AJ, the person right in front of me, and looking at their hips. Why would it be the hips in the push jerk?
Well, that is one of the main points of performance we want to see with the push jerk, is to get that full hip extension during the drive. And one of the main things that happens dynamically when we say go.
All right, sweet. So let's watch how this plays out afterwards.
Abs down like that. Mindy, press up and pull back. Go ahead and stand, reset. AJ, on this next one, I want you to jump until your shoulder hits my hand.
Okay, I love this. Let's pause it and talk about how that. I like the timing in which you gave those different cues, and that can be something that coaches struggle with a little bit, right? Because it's like, all right, if we backtrack to the beginning, you got them in their setup position, you gave a few people a setup or static fix, right? And now it's time to do go, the dynamic, that one. So ready, go. You're watching one athlete, you're watching one body part, so you're essentially looking at that hip extension. And then comes another static position, which is that hold in the receiving. And so what you did then was scan around, make a couple corrections on the static. So there we have like the 2-1-2, if you will, or static, dynamic, static. And then you remembered to go back to AJ during the reset and remind him of what to do during the dynamic. And this is the part I believe, and you tell me if you agree too, Todd, this is where a lot of coaches kind of get off the rails and can find themselves kind of getting off track with the process of it.
Yeah. So what do you mean? So
like
I just
I'm
observed
holding them in their receiving position, and I just saw AJ not open his hips. And so now while they're holding in their receiving position, I'm giving him the cue about his hip extension. Then I tell them to stand and reset so I can watch his hip extension. And now I've just missed scanning static for receiving position and finish position.
Yeah, and so and this is an interesting one, and it kind of depends on the movement itself, in my opinion, right? In the push jerk, they're in that receiving position. It's like holding the bar over their head is a harder thing to do, and so I'm probably going to give the cues, the static cues at the end, to make the corrections. Then when I reset them, that's a quote unquote easier position for them to hold. And so I'm going to give the guidance on the dynamic for the next rep there. You with me? So a lot of it has to do with one, there's a static position that I want to look at, which is that overhead position. Then the number two, the dynamic correction is going to take a little bit longer than some of the static stuff. And so I want to put my athletes in a position to where I'm not killing everybody holding their position, right? I want them to be able to listen to what I'm saying without being so burdened by what they are doing physically that they won't pay attention or they can't pay attention. Now,
and go ahead.
On the flip side of that, if this movement was a deadlift and I watch the bar go around the knees, instead of waiting until they're back in the setup position again, because that's a more challenging position than the finish or the standing position, I would have given the dynamic one at the top. Hey, AJ, on the next rep, I want you to pull your knees back as you lift, or something to that effect.
Right. And then you reset. Now they're back down on their setup position. Now here's your next opportunity to make sure that everybody's setup position is how you want.
Yeah.
Let's look at this question from Matt. Yeah.
Hips would also violate the core to extremity principle too, correct? If the hips don't fully extend before the arms move. Yeah. So if somebody has not extended their hips fully and they've pressed with their arms, then you're absolutely right. That is a core to extremity movement violation. Now, if we think about that concept of triage, right? We always want to start with, or we want to pick one thing to work on at a time. And so in this scenario, it's like, all right, cool. We're lacking hip extension. Technically, we're pressing early. Well, which one do you need before the other one can and should happen? Well, I need the full hip extension first. So I'm probably going to ignore the core extremity violation, focusing on the hip extension first, hoping that will fix potentially the early press, right? And
there's kind of like the two birds with one stone every once in a while.
And there's a few different things too, right? There's an early press where somebody presses well before they've even like jumped, or at the start of their jump rather than the top. And then there's the core extremity violation where it's like, well, technically they use their arms more than their legs because they didn't extend their hips, but the timing of like, it was at the top of the jump that they started to extend, even though the jump didn't reach full hip extension. You know, those are kind of the same fault, but shown in two different ways, which dictates the priority. Would you agree with that, Kristin? Do Do you see it the same? Okay. Matt, so hopefully that makes sense, but you're spot on. That's definitely a core to extremity violation. All right.
Oh, so sweet. Now we're throwing the tactile cue for the next rep because we're looking for his hip to get open, right?
Yeah, and you can see that my eyes are focused on somebody else. And this is an interesting dynamic because my hand's here, so I'm going to be able to feel whether he hits my hand, and it gives me some freedom to allow my eyes to drift a little bit.
All right, I want to do a test. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I'm gonna play the full next rep because we've been stopping and talking about it so much that it might be hard to kind of get a true feel for what's happening. So I'm gonna play maybe the next 2 reps. Let's do that. Hold
on. There we go. Alyssa, squeeze your quads nice and tight and go. Better. AJ, crunch your abs down just a little bit. Mindy, look at me. Press up harder and pull back. That's it. And stand. Reset. On this next one, I want you to try to squeeze your quads harder in that jump. Alyssa, look at me real quick. Do this with your elbows. Then pull the bar down. AJ, elbows forward just a little bit. And go. Nice hip extension, Rena. Crunch your abs down a little bit for me there. And then press up hard with your arms. Alyssa, pull back on that bar just a little bit. And stand. Reset.
All right. Well, actually, let me get
that.
All right. You said there was something that you were curious to see or that you were thinking about that you wanted to see. What was it?
I thought you were looking at Rena and you were going to tell her to crunch her abs down a little, but you ended up looking to, what's the girl behind in the blue shirt? Her name?
Alyssa, yeah.
Alyssa. So you said for Alyssa to squeeze her quads, you worked your way over to Rena, and then you ended up asking Rena to crunch her abs down. So you're working your way around. It's good. It's hard to remember to keep checking back into those static positions as you start to get your rhythm with calling reps as you're watching the dynamic. And sometimes what I like about this is I don't want to say calm, you're calm, but there's such a structure to it that oftentimes coaches think that in order for us to get as many cues as possible, we almost have to be on like high speed, right? Like we have to be like, da, 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 da. But you're very structured in the way you're moving around and looking at your athletes and doing that static dynamic. And it doesn't feel rushed and it doesn't feel at high speed, but you're still covering a lot of ground. You're still getting a ton of corrections in. So I just think that that's something worth pointing out, that this doesn't have to be like overdrive, fast, crazy speed. We can still do it in a nice cadence. And that actually can help us stick with our static dynamic.
I almost feel like there's a journey that happens when we're trying to get better at this concept of like, to begin with, it's devastatingly hard, right? I'm like, I don't know what to look for. I don't know what to see. I don't know what to say. Then you get to the point where you start to get comfortable looking at those static positions, giving some cues and corrections. A lot of times what I see happen then is we get so focused on static positions that we stop looking for or start missing dynamic stuff because we're so concerned with static. So then the evolution is like, all right, now I'm so comfortable with static that I revisit dynamic again. And then the evolution becomes that like you used to not see much of anything. Now you start to see everything. And to your point, you're correcting almost everything and it's happening at warp speed. And then you finally get used to that and it kind of settles in where it's like, now I'm being overproductive or it's too much or I'm overdoing it. Let me settle back in just
for sure. And one of the pitfalls too, when you start to see more things, you can then start to get distracted. And we want to try to stay disciplined, right? We want to try. It's like, okay, I'm looking for hip extension. That's what I'm going to be watching for. Well, I'm watching for hip extension. Then I happen to see that like their right shoulder is just slightly internally rotated. And so now all of a sudden I'm like focusing on this like tweaking of the shoulder position. And then I see that that person in the back also their shoulder look. And then before you know it, you're just all over the place and you've completely forgotten what you were trying to look for in the first place. So again, this practicing this strategy or this process is a journey and it is hard. And one of the hardest things I think for a lot of coaches is just to, again, stay disciplined and really stick with the thing that you're trying to watch so you can continue to A, develop your eye on that particular thing, B, make your athletes better in that particular thing, and C, continue to practice executing this structure of the static, dynamic, static.
Yeah.
What's up, Cody?
Yeah. How do you feel about verbal, visual, tactile coming in that order? Tactile comes last if the first two don't work. I've heard Pat speak about this before. I definitely do think I wouldn't necessarily say the sequence in which you offer your cues, but that is the sequence in which the volume typically goes. Like most of my coaching, my seeing and correcting is cued verbally. It's just like, as you've seen in this video already, from where I'm standing in one place, I can verbally cue everybody and I can do it really, really quickly. Visual oftentimes, from my experience, helps a lot of people that like either my words aren't simple enough or they're just not connecting the dot. And so when I add just the visual component, we've seen a couple of those with like me showing Alyssa to push your elbows forward or Mindy to pull the bar back or press up a little bit more. And then tactile is one of those cues. It's very selective, and there's certain faults that I'll use it for in certain environments where I'll use it. And then there's other times where I'll never use it. Like if this was being done with barbells, I probably don't do a tactile cue.
I'll say one thing quickly about the tactile cue. I agree. I'm going to use it when it makes sense and it's necessary to use it, but I'm not going to use a tactile cue just for the sake of like checking the box on a tactile cue. Like, oh, I haven't done any tactile cues in this class. I need to get a tactile cue in. Well, no, if it doesn't make sense to use one and my verbal and visuals are working just fine, maybe I don't really need to throw a tactile cue in there.
And I feel like, I know for myself, when I wasn't as articulate with what I was going to say verbally with verbal cues, I used, and I didn't connect the dots on how to really demonstrate a visual, probably because one, I wasn't as familiar with the movements as I needed to be. I didn't move as well as I thought I did. And so I would do a lot of tactile, but they were done technically actually in the wrong way, where I'd run over to people and I'd kind of grab them to try to pull them into the right positions to some degree or manipulate.
They probably loved that. I bet they loved that.
Oh yeah. Such a good experience, I'm sure. And then the other weird thing with that happens, and especially if there's a lot of us that struggle and that's our default to correction style. Like if I'm over here in this corner and I see that something's going on with Alyssa and my default is tactile, well, now I'm going to have to run all the way to the back corner to give her that cue. And potentially, like with 4 people, probably not a big deal. With 12 people, 15 people, I've probably just ran past, 8 of those people that I'm now going to miss looking at and miss seeing things. And I'm going to get kind of lost on where I'm at. And now I'm just that little kid in the outfield chasing the butterfly or the dandelions, as opposed to having my plan and staying structured and working through the class.
Yeah, and this is precisely why we refer to tactile cues as the most expensive cues, right? And also why there's such an importance of having a variety of cues in your toolbox, because if tactile is your go-to, if that's the one you are the most comfortable with, you want to still be able to do a quick verbal or quick visual for that exact reason. Like we can't be ping-ponging like a little pinball machine all around the class. It's not the most effective use of time when you've got a bigger class.
For sure. All right, let's watch a little bit more here.
Okay.
Let's see.
On this next one, Ren, I want you to punch harder with your arms. AJ, squeeze your abs nice and tight. Mindy, elbows can come down and out just a little bit. And go. Yeah, Rena, that's fantastic. Good. Mindy, look at me. Crunch this down. Alyssa, press up a little harder. That a girl. Stand. Reset. Nice. I like that setup position. AJ, feet just a little bit closer together. Alyssa.
So one thing to take note of on a lot of this stuff, and especially for coaches that are struggling with this concept, is if you can get to the point where you start to remember the things that you've corrected with athletes before. Like I paused it right there because what did I just work on with AJ?
Did you tell him to bring his feet in?
And what was the very first thing that I did in this coaching session was told him to bring his feet in. And so it's like to be able to take that mental note of like, all right, I fixed this once. That means that that is my athlete's tendency or their habit or their go-to. And so as we do more reps, they're going to forget that first cue and go back to what they're used to. And so I'm going to need to revisit that and at least check back in again. And that gives me an opportunity to look and be like, all right, cool. I'm going to remind him to bring him back in to hopefully take that old habit and turn it into a new correct habit. Or I get a chance to look, and if he's doing it right, that gives me an opportunity to give some praise.
Yeah.
All right.
Crunch your abs down again and go. Nice hip extension. Crunch your abs down nice and tight. AJ, press up harder on the bar. Nice and stand. Reset. Try to have your arms locked out when you land here, Mindy. Here we go. Rena, elbows forward just a little bit. Good.
Good.
And go.
Another check back in with
better,
Rena.
Mindy. I like it. Now crunch your abs down. Press up into my hand with that bar. Good. And stand.
So it's a lot of just revisiting and giving the same cues over and over again, right? Rena's elbows was the second thing I worked on. Boom, there it is again. Overhead position and rib cage for Mindy, that kind of stuff. So it's like, hey, what can we start to remember what our athletes' tendencies are? Can we check back with those things and then just keep making those little adjustments? I think, as we talked about earlier, they're pretty subtle things. Nothing that is going on with these athletes here is terrible, right? They're just okay positions that we're trying to work to make a little bit better, correct? Thoughts there? I've lost you there. Something happened.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, there we go.
My mic got muted for some reason.
Oh, I gotcha.
What was I going to say? Oh, this is where the word contrast really starts to come into play and what I start to think of, right? When you're saying, yeah, they're not these crazy big corrections you're making, but they're little enough that we can see a contrast in what they look like before. Let's use Rena's elbows, for example. We see a contrast in what they looked like when she first started to what they look like once you corrected her. And while it wasn't a crazy change, there's still a change for the better. And so now the way that I like to think of it is now I essentially have this visual snapshot of a contrast of what I want her to look like. And from now on, for the whole rest of the session, I can compare whatever she looks like to that visual of me getting her in a better position. And if she doesn't look like that thing that I have in my brain, then that gives me something that I can come back to and remind her to get her elbows up. In AJ's case, maybe it's his feet a little bit narrower. In Alyssa's case, it's pressing the bar a little bit harder in her receiving position. Once you make that tiny little change and you see the change, I'm like, okay, that's what I'm looking for now from now on, because they've just shown me that they can get into that position. And it just becomes a lot easier as the session goes on to make those quick little corrections, because I can see the contrast from where they were before when I made them better to where they kind of reverted back to.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know if anybody watching has attempted this, what their challenges are, what their thoughts are, like what's their process when they're trying this concept of static, dynamic, static, and how it's going for them. And if there's anything that they specifically know is the challenging spot that maybe we can talk about and come up with some ideas on how to work on and fix.
Let's play a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah, play just a little bit more.
Yeah. I tried to get to the screenshot of what you were talking about with the elbows, if I could show the difference there, but so I rounded a little bit.
Okay.
Good. Go. And go. That's better, Mindy. I like it. Now crunch your abs down. Press up into my hand with that bar. Good. And stand. Reset. Don't worry, we'll get that thing stood all the way up next time. Here we go. Alyssa, crunch your abs down. AJ, pull that bar down towards your shoulders. And go. Nice hip extension. Crunch your abs down nice and tight for me, Alyssa. Rena, press up more. Good. Stand. Reset. Relax.
So there's a static position, Todd, that you are leaving off the table fairly consistently. Have you noticed?
Oh, the finished static position?
Yeah. Are you doing that on purpose or? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I get them there and then bring them back down. Yeah, without making any additional corrections.
Yeah, and the push jerk is one of those hard ones, right? Because there's actually a lot of positions we could have them in static, right? Where we have the setup position, okay, go, and now we have the receiving position, and then we say stand, and now we have our finish position. So, and then we say reset, and now we have our other setup position. So technically, you have 3 static positions that all come right one right after another.
And what's cool to think about with that is like, all right, which positions and points of performance and faults can I accomplish and correct in the first static position, so the receiving position, that would carry over and probably still be correct in the finish position?
Mm-hmm.
And which is the additional thing that I probably should stop and look for in that finish position when I stand them up? And so if we think about that, it's like, well, what's the thing that I can fix in the receiving that will probably carry over to the finish? What would that thing be?
The one that pops out to my mind right away is just locked out arms, like pressing up on the bar.
Yeah, the active shoulder. So if I catch that in that receiving position, I'm like, hey, AJ, press up harder, Rena, lock out your arms. That's probably not going to change when I say stand up. Now, what's the other big thing that I can and should look for in that finish position that the receiving and the finish, there's some opportunity for there a little more wiggle room in the receiving that needs to be reinforced in the finish?
I would say the midline stabilization, neutral spine, ribs down.
Absolutely. Yeah, right. And I've cued that a couple of times in the receiving position, but because it's a partial squat and there's a little bit more extension there, the likelihood of somebody standing up and being a little bit more relaxed there. So that's absolutely something that can be looked for and worked on. And I think that's the point, is like, it's hard when you start this thing because you're like, I don't know what to look for or what to see or what to do. And then the more you get into this, you're like, I could do 1 rep and hold them there for 5 minutes and never stop stuff, right? Yeah. What do we got? I still struggle at moments looking at the whole movement as opposed to looking at something specific in the dynamic position.
AAA, you're probably the only coach that struggles with that. And I'm being very sarcastic. That is one of the most common things for sure.
And so that's it, right? Is like, and this is when it becomes challenging, especially as we're coaching classes with multiple skill levels. And in fact, this week in coaches development, that's exactly what we were working on. A lot of the call that I had yesterday with our group was on this discussion, is like, cool, when I've got a class and there's brand new beginner athletes, I've got intermediate athletes, and I've got advanced athletes, the default for most of us coaches is like, hey, these beginner athletes are new. They're not doing this stuff as well. They need my attention. I'm going to default to spending more time there. You've got your advanced athletes that can do most of the workout as prescribed or like score well. You're like, they're definitely not going to kill themselves. They know how to do the movements. And so I'm going to kind of leave them be. When we start the process of trying to look at everybody and coach everybody, the process becomes a little bit different, because with those beginner athletes, we can take that like global look or that macro look where it's like, I just watch them do the movement in general and something's going to jump out to us because because their faults are going to be more obvious.
Especially the more complex movements that are much harder neurologically, right? We're just trying to get them to do the thing in the right order and look somewhat like they're supposed to look. Yeah.
And it's going to be like, man, I watch you try to do a push jerk. This is your first, 3 to 6 months of doing push jerks. There's going to be a lot to work on. Overhead position, hip extension, timing, like all of that stuff is going to be there. And I don't really have to be specific because it's going to be so obvious. Now, on the flip side of that, I start looking for my advanced athletes that have been doing this for 3, 5, sometimes 10 years. Now, all of a sudden, that global look or that macro look doesn't tell me anything, because they've got the movement, quote unquote, down. Right. And
and if you just look at them from that macro perspective, almost always, and you're not specifically looking for something, almost always you're gonna be like, yeah, I mean, it looks pretty good. Right. It's like, yeah, that looked good. I don't really see anything.
And so what I always try to revisit and I always go back to, and this is like at my gym, if somebody wants to be a coach, step one is doing this one thing, which is memorizing the points of performance for the movement. And it's like, we've always got to revert back to that because in my opinion, that's the basis for everything that we do. We need to teach to the points of performance. We need to look specifically for the points of performance. And those are the first things that we need to correct. And so like, when you fall into the trap of being like, man, I'm just watching the full movement. And more than likely, when you do that with an advanced athlete, when you notice that you don't see anything, that's when you need to be like, oh crap. All right. What are the main points of performance that are unique and specific to this movement? And let me look specifically for those.
Yeah, I like referring to the points of performance as the checklist, a checklist of what we're looking for in good movement, because when in doubt, just go through the checklist, think, okay, I need to see a neutral spine. So now I'm just going to look at the midline and make sure that looks good in all the phases of the movement. All right. I need to make sure that I see like an active shoulder position. And that's a great place to start. If you're struggling a little bit, is just don't worry about trying to see something specific. Just go through that checklist and really focus in on that one thing at a time. And often, like if I'm working with a coach and I'm guiding them through that process and I see what I want them to see, but they don't quite see it yet because they're like, I don't know, it looks pretty good. But now we start going through that checklist and then we get to that one specific thing. Okay, now we're only looking at, fill in the blank. We're only going to look at the hip. Oh man, they're not opening their hip all the way. No, they're not opening their hip all the way. And we're not seeing that if we look at everything from a big picture. But now once we start just really going in, okay, check. Yeah, receiving position looks pretty good. Yeah, midline looks pretty good. Okay, I like their setup position. Oh, their hip's not opening all the way. Boom, crushed it. We just have to have a little bit of the process there.
Yeah, and I think here's something I always try to remind myself and other coaches is like, if you're watching somebody move and you don't see a fault, it is not because there is not a fault. It is because you don't see it. Like one of the greatest or not greatest things about functional movements is you cannot do them perfectly. You will never do one of these movements without room for improvement. So if you see something, you're like, looks pretty good. Look harder. Go back to that checklist, figure out what those points of performance are and look specifically for those.
Especially as our athletes start moving faster, or getting tired, or moving a little bit more weight, for sure. There's always going to be something. Yeah.
And we got a question or a comment from Allie G over on IG. Said the challenge is balancing giving static and dynamic cues and giving athletes enough reps. Maybe it's because I'm new to this process, but it can move slowly and then the athletes haven't done a lot of reps.
Mm-hmm.
You're absolutely right. Like as we begin to do anything, it's going to be slow and it's going to feel clunky and you're going to be like, crap, I didn't accomplish as much as I wanted to accomplish. And that's okay. Like being all right with that, because the more you do it, the better it's going to get and the faster it's going to get. And even in fact, if it's like, hey, I'm going to start this process today and I'm trying this 2-1-2 and like through the first 3 reps, this feels so slow that I'm like, hey, I need them to do some more reps. So I'm going to kind of abandon part of it and speed up and do a few more at the end. And instead of like, so today I was only able to do 3 reps with the static, dynamic, static. Well, tomorrow or next class, see if you can get to 4 or 5 reps with that. Just try to get a little bit better, and don't think you have to nail it at the beginning. It's going to change.
It's all, and you're right where you need to be, right? Like it's challenging because it's new. It feels slow and clunky because it's new. But if we abandon it now, when it's slow and clunky and challenging, you're never going to get better at it. As we know, we've got to kind of work through that time where it's like, this feels awkward, this feels slow. And that's one of the reasons we talk about it doesn't have to be 2-1-2. It could be 1-1-1, or it could even be 1-1. Like use static, dynamic, setup, dynamic, setup, dynamic. And then maybe, the next few reps, you're like, okay, I've gotten their setup pretty good. Now I'm going to focus on dynamic finish position. Like we can break this apart a little bit to scale it, if you will. And then as you start to get a little bit more proficient, a little more comfortable, then we just start increasing the intensity. It's just like anything.
I love this comment, and I can't tell you how often I repeat this thing. Triple A says, we use the word focus a lot, telling athletes what we are looking for every progression. That not only tells the athletes what we're looking for, but also reminds us what we're doing.
100%. I want you guys to focus on pushing your hips back and down, right? Is this what we're saying?
Yeah, and it's me telling them what I need them to do, and then it's me verbally reminding myself, don't get off track. That is what you're looking for. I'm watching your hips go back and down, and that is the primary thing I'm looking for. And so often it's like, if we don't give that focus point or we don't say it, one, the athlete's not going to know to necessarily do it, which is part of an issue. But just as equally important or just as equally bad is I don't remember what I'm looking for, and then I get lost. And that's when we start chasing our tail a little bit and looking for anything that shows up. So I love that. I think that's such a great strategy on how to reinforce what you're looking for and how to actually see it.
I also like the strategy too. You know, you had mentioned with Affiliate U, our lesson currently is coaching multiple levels in a class. I like the strategy for multiple levels too, because if you think about, you know, most of us watching, we're coaches, we've been doing this for a while. If you take a class and you're being coached, you're running through a specific warm up, and you just hear and go, reset, and go, reset, and go, reset. I mean, it's boring, right? I know how to do these movements. I've done them hundreds and hundreds of times. But if my coach is giving me something to focus on each time, now that's really allowing me every single rep. There is purpose to the rep. Okay, on this one, I'm really thinking about making sure that the bar gets past my knee before I bend my knee on the descent of a deadlift. Okay, on this one, I'm really thinking about pulling my shoulders back so that I keep that bar close to the body and my shoulders engaged. So it's helping me really fine tune my movement during those practice reps, even though I've done these movements hundreds of times. And this is a great strategy when you're dealing with athletes that have been around for a long time. You're like, they just get bored. They don't like going through warm-up reps because they know how to do it already. Well, give them a focus point and really push them to make their movement as good as you possibly can.
Yeah, that one to me, it's like, I still take our 12 o'clock class pretty much every single day. And I'm going through the progressions, and I've been doing this stuff for, going on 20 years. And it's like, there are so many positions that I'm still working to get into. There are so many things I'm still working on. And I come from a baseball background. It's like nobody takes their first swing of the bat in the batter's box against a 90 or 100 mile an hour fastball. It's like you show up, you hit off the tee, then you do soft toss, then you take like little flips, like all of this stuff. I'm like, who in the world is so good and have been doing these movements for so long that they can just grab the barbell, put 135 on, and start snatching?
It's so silly when we think about it. Because I use the example of Serena Williams all the time when I talk to the coaches of the level twos, especially, where it's like, she is arguably the greatest of all time tennis player, but she still goes out on the court with the ball machine across from her and just works on her backhand. Like, that's it. Nothing else is happening. She's just working on, it's practice. It's isolating things. It's practice. She's not going out there playing a Wimbledon level match every time she steps onto the court. And so people that are like, I'm above the practice time, I'm above the progressions, I'm above the PVC. It's just, that is it just blows my mind. And yeah, I think it's a little bit, our responsibility as coaches to make sure we provide the value in that practice time and in those progressions so that our athletes can start to see where that lies.
That's the point, right? It's like, if we are like, hey, we're doing this deadlift shrug for the clean, and it's the same deadlift shrug that they've done, the last 3 years, and you've not giving them the focus point that we just talked about, or told them that they need to like scoop their knees forward a little bit before they go, like some of that kind of stuff. If we're not giving them something to focus on, then they are just empty reps, right? And so it's twofold. It's like, the athlete themselves need to realize the importance of what they're doing and see value in that, knowing that like, hey, I need to work on the fundamentals to actually get better at this stuff, but we need to help them do that by pointing out the things that they can improve upon and keep working on. Yeah, I love that. Preach, baby. Here we go.
Don't get us started. We can go forever.
We'll get on the soapbox with this thing.
Yeah.
Spend time, move well, for sure.
I'm laughing when you're talking about taking the 12 o'clock class and doing the progressions. I took a class the other morning. We had push press in it. So we're going through the progressions of push press. And my brain was working so hard to just like, okay, upright torso, but don't mute your hip. Okay, stay on your heels, but upright torso, but no muted hip. I mean, I couldn't even begin to tell you how many push presses I've done, how many push presses I've done on the demo box of the PVC at the level ones. And I'm still having to think so hard just with the dip and drive,
I always say
doesn't never end.
I think that position specifically is the hardest thing we do movement wise in all of CrossFit. Because it's the upright torso position that we need in the dip of the push press, that we need in the dip of the push jerk, and also of the split jerk, because it's a different movement pattern than everything else that we do. When we're squatting, what do we want need our hips to do?
Push back first, initiate back and down.
When we're deadlifting, where do our hips go?
They're going to go back and down.
When we're kettlebell swinging, where do our hips go?
Yeah, back.
If we do the same thing in the push press, what's the issue?
Our torso goes way too far forward. Yeah. Which is probably the most common thing we see with the dip position or just the push press in general, is people's torso coming forward.
Yeah. And so, spending the time working on that position and like doing deliberate practice. Like if you're just in there going through the motions of your reps, like you said, if you're just in class and your brain wasn't working and you're just like, I've done 1 million push presses, I'm just going to dip and hold, and you weren't actively focusing on doing all the things that you were, then you're right. It is a waste. You're not accomplishing probably as much as you could be or should be. But what's the point of that? Like if I'm going to do anything, I might as well do it right. Like how you do anything is how you do everything. I love that concept in that saying. It's like, if I'm going to be in class, one, I want to get warmed up so my body feels good so I can actually do the workout. But then number two, I want to take something away from this workout, from this skill session. I want to learn something more than likely about my movement, about how I'm going to break up reps, about my capacity. Like if the only thing I take away from class is the sweat that has now drenched my t-shirt and like the score that I'm going to put on the whiteboard, I've missed the boat.
I also like the idea of better technique makes the movement easier. Like when I'm in the middle of the workout and I'm doing multiple reps of push press, that's going to get hard. So I want my technique to be good. So it doesn't it's a little bit easier to get the weight overhead because I'm not hinging forward every single time, or I'm using all my posterior chain muscles. So yeah, there's benefits to doing the movements well and to practicing for sure.
Yeah, 100%.
We didn't get to Omar's question.
Oh yeah. Let's hit that real quick. We got
2
minutes left. We can hit this thing.
All right.
All right. So
trying to find it.
His comment, I've got it on the screen.
You got it? Okay, great.
Yep. He mentioned, how would you go about teaching all movements to a chipper? I struggled today, but I didn't go over and did my best. I had a brand new person too. And so here was the workout. We've got 4-time 2,250 meter row or 2,500 meter row, 50 pull-ups, 40 deadlifts, 20 ring dips, 30 or 20, or what is it? 30 ring dips,
20 deadlifts,
10 wall balls or wall walks.
The deadlift gets heavier. Okay, the deadlifts get heavier. Okay, so nice little chipper there. And he's specifically asking about using the 2-1-2. That we were talking, the static, dynamic, static, how we incorporate that.
But how would you go about teaching all the movements in the chipper? Well, number one, my general warm-up is starting to walk through these movements. So my general warm-up is everybody's on a rower. And now I'm probably calling some row strokes to begin with. So we're starting in that catch or that setup position.
Static.
I'm turning into a static, looking for people's feet to be flat on the machine. Looking for their back to be flat, their shoulder to be in front of their hips. Then I might call some reps to make sure that the sequencing is correct, holding the back to make sure that they're pulling the bar or the handle where it needs to be. So I'm holding positions and calling reps before I cut them loose to probably row 250 to 500 meters to get warmed up. Then we probably go over to the wall walk We start working on the wall walk specifically. And it's like, you can break this thing down. It's like, have everybody lay on the ground, make sure their hands are where you want them to be. Then tell people to step their feet up the wall before they've started to walk their hands back. Check to make sure that their body is in the position that you want it to be. Command 1 or 2 steps backwards, then back down, and work your way up. So it's like all of these movements, and sometimes it's tough with gymnastics movements. Sometimes it's tough to think about, how do I turn these into static positions?
Yes.
But you have the control. Even with the pull-up, if I have my athletes stand under the pull-up bar first, make sure everybody's at the right pull-up bar, then I cue them or tell them to jump up and hang. That's now a static position. So I can look at their grip. How close are their hands on the bar? Are their feet together and their body position correct? And are they demonstrating a version of an active shoulder? Sweet. Now I can say go, and they start their kip swings or whatever my progression step is. And that's dynamic. And it's going to be harder for me to see everybody because I'm not calling the specific reps. But I'm going to have a better chance if I'm kind of cueing them through this stuff, right?
And just controlling it as much as you can for what that movement is. Same thing with the ring dips, right? Like even those gymnastics, every gymnastics movement has at least a setup position that, like, at the very least low hanging fruit, you can get everybody into the setup position, pause, look around, 1 rep, finish position for a ring dip, hold the top of the ring dip.
Hold the top. You can also teach it in a way to where you're holding the bottom of the ring dip, right? And then you're working negatives and jumping and things like that. So you can watch what's going on in the dynamic. Usually if we can figure out the setup, the top of the rings and the bottom of the rings, it's kind of hard to mess up getting from one position to the next without, like, if you're doing those right.
And the other thing I like, really quick, just to throw out there, is that you're not doing it in the order that the chipper is. Like, you don't have, you can create your own order to make sense for the progression of the warm up that's different than the order of the workout.
And here's the other thing too, is like this concept of 2-1-2 does not always work out to have a setup, a dynamic, and a finish. Like the pull-up, if we're doing
a
whole
people.
You could, but
you could.
If we're just doing kip swings, I can create a setup at the beginning, a static at the beginning setup to make sure their hands are where they need to be, their body position's right. Then when I say go, they do their swings, that's dynamic. I'm not going to have them stop and finish and have a in setup or static position. So now it's a 2-1, 2-1, right? There's no 2 at the end of this thing. So understanding that this is just a concept and it's not a hard and fast, like we've got to do it this way, hopefully helps there to some degree.
Yeah. And like, I think big picture, kind of wrapping that all up, the concept is teach the setup position and then give yourself an opportunity to look around and scan and make sure everybody's set up the way you want them. And then when it's time for them to go, call the reps. And maybe they're doing 5 kip swings, right? It doesn't have to be like 1 kip swing, but know that you're in control of when you call the rep and you know what you're looking for when you are saying go. You just have something that you're going to be looking for, and then you can just continue to build on from there.
Nice. Love it. As always, great chatting with you guys. Appreciate the comments, the interactions, and we look forward to seeing everybody next week. See you on Thursday.
Bye.